everyone's talking about the benefits of fish oil, but what we don't really talk about is how are those benefits really achieved? These fat-soluble vitamins, if they're toxic, they're seeping into our system, they're staying there, they're not water-soluble, so we're not really peeing them out, and they can have a major detrimental impact on people's health and wellness journeys.
It's really easy to run the test to see things like, do I have enough magnesium? Is my methylation working properly? Am I detoxifying well? And when you are able to address each part of detoxification, which really is running on nutrients, and so many people are deficient, it all works much smoother and is more effective.
Every chronic illness is impacted by nitric oxide. Every chronic illness is impacted by a lack of vitamin D3. And yet, nobody's talking about how to supplement or raise your nitric oxide. Natural ingredients will safely signal your body and say, produce nitric oxide.
Welcome to episode 2 of Supplements Revealed. In episode 1, we heard from the likes of Dr. Stephen Gundry. What an amazing human being, brilliant and great information that to me is truly life-changing. But it doesn't stop there. In episode 2, we have a lineup for you that's going to be a real gift to you. The wisdom, information, and scope of what is covered is something that is transformative. It is our desire to have a massive impact on your life through this information. And I know that there is a lot of it. This is a big world to sort through, which is why we encourage you to also own Supplements Revealed. Not only will you be supporting our mission, but is also something that on a personal level will pay dividends to you and the ones that you care about for years to come. So get ready. We are action-packed in this episode, and I'm looking forward to delivering it to you right now. Next up, we have Evan DeMarco, and the scope of his knowledge is breathtaking. He plays a key and maybe even pivotal role in the supplement industry. You will hear throughout this entire series about source materials, how important source materials are. And in Evan's case, that's the role he plays. He is the person that gets the source materials and brings them to the manufacturers. So he sees it all. He's seeing how people are manufacturing, what they're buying, what they're putting together, and in the end, what's making it in the bottle that you're buying. So in that case, this is an important understanding in the supply chain of supplementation. This is something to understand, and once you do, you're gonna have a much better stance to be able to make better decisions from. So, enjoy this interview. Evan, thanks for taking the time to sit down and talk to us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to this conversation because we're having a lot of interaction around the source of things and how important that source is, and you're a man who could speak to that based on what you do. So tell us about your background.
Well, it's an interesting background. So currently I'm the Global Director of Market Development for the KD Pharma Group. And KD Pharma Group is the largest manufacturer of prescription-grade omega-3 products in the world. And then the third largest manufacturer of dietary supplement omega products in the world. So I'm kind of further up the value chain. I'm, the fishing vessels, how is that oil sourced? How does that oil get extracted and then ultimately down to the consumer? So more of, the manufacturing and product development side versus the brand side. And I kind of got to this place in a rather unique way. Started out as an English and journalism major on a baseball scholarship and got injured, lost my scholarship, and basically didn't know what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. So I kind of bounced around, did some writing, found out I couldn't make any money in that, became an investment banker, got the three-piece suits, a little bit of like what we're wearing now. Recognized I didn't like that. It was, it just wasn't everything that I was excited about. I wasn't passionate about it. So once I left that, I had an opportunity to acquire a sports nutrition company. And sports had always really been the focus of my life. You know, growing up in a small town, sports was your escape, it was your way out, it was just the thing to do to keep you from getting in trouble. So getting back into sports was something that I'd always really found was driving my decisions, and I was so passionate about it. But I wanted to understand the product development side of things. So I didn't have the science background, I'd had the business background. So then I went back to school and I studied all the things that no one ever wants to study, your organic chemistry, your biochemistry, literally taking classes on product development and how things, work, interact. And so what I would do, I was in school at night, and I would take everything I was learning at night into the lab the next day and hound our lab technicians, our product dev people, and they hated me. I was just a guy with a yellow legal pad saying, hey, can we do this? Can we do this? And they're like, kid, go away, go sell something, But it gave me a really interesting and unique perspective on product development. And one of the first things that I found out as I went through this is that product development for me had to be personal. I wasn't going to make anything that I myself wouldn't take, and now that I'm a father, I wouldn't make anything that I wouldn't give to my kids. And so as I've kind of ventured past that company, sold that, ended up consulting for multiple companies in the market, doing product development, doing marketing, building marketing strategies. At last check, I think I had about $500 million in retail sales with some of the products that I developed. I really got to understand the potential of what dietary supplements can do if they're done right. But I also got to see what could be done, all the harm that comes from not doing it right, from just making a quick buck, from all the people who are just trying to get into this business, throw a label on something, sell something, and then get out after basically everyone finds out that their product is less than what's on the label.
Yeah. So in your area now, fish oil is a huge marketplace, right? And
number one seller in the supplements.
It is number one. Okay,
Yep.
So I wasn't sure about that. And it's in the last decade or so, it's really come on the scene, and it's been something that has been highly touted with extraordinary health benefits, et cetera. Yeah. And and you could be completely how can I put it? Transparently critical of this arena because you know it so well.
Yeah.
So I guess maybe let's start with the bad, then we'll get to the good. We'll end on a positive note. So what are some of the challenges in that area as far as what products are being put into the market, sold as fish oil supplements with all these benefits, but as a consumer I should be concerned about?
That is a great question, right? And the one thing about fish oil is there's good fish oil and there's bad fish oil, but it's not like the rest of the dietary supplement industry where you might have fillers, you might have things that aren't really, label claims aren't accurate. Fish oil basically comes down to how it's concentrated. So we'll do, I'll kind of explain the whole process, but basically most fish oil is sourced from Peruvian anchovies and sardines, sustainable fishing grounds off of the coast of South America. So these little fishies are taken to a factory and they're literally just pressed. And so what you have is fish oil and fish meal. And that fish meal is sent off to like fertilizer factories, pet food factories throughout the world. That fish oil that's left over is what's commonly referred to as 1812 or crude oil. And that 1812 is indicative of the EPA and DHA concentration in the oil, 18% EPA, 12% DHA, for a total of about 30% omegas. The rest of that 70% is all the bad stuff, right? It's pro-inflammatory omega-6, it's saturated fat, it's cholesterol, all the things that we actually consider bad fats. So here's where it gets a little funny, right? Everyone really knows about the benefits of omegas. It's impossible to not turn on a TV and see, whether it's Larry King pitching his product or, everyone's talking about the benefits of fish oil, but what we don't really talk about is how are those benefits really achieved. So you go to your really big box, retail store where you're going to get your 3-year supply of toilet paper and 2-year supply of fish oil, for like $10. And what you're usually getting is that 1812, that really, cheap, minimally refined crude oil. And there's really nothing wrong with that, except that here in America, we've kind of really screwed ourselves up. So if we take a step back and we look at what Americans were like 200 years ago, you had this omega-6 to omega-3 ratio that was like 4-1. And I think most doctors kind of agree that that's an optimal ratio. But now with the modern Western diet, our sedentary lifestyle, McDonald's, Taco Bell, all the things that we should not be eating, but we seem to consume in epic quantities, that ratio has jumped to a staggering like 20 to 25 to 1. Wow. Meaning you have, for every omega-6 molecule, for every 20 of those, you only have one omega-3. Now, that becomes hyper pro-inflammatory. So when you take this really cheap fish oil, that's got all of that extra omega-6 on it, you think that you're doing something good for your heart, for your brain, for your eyes, for your joints. But you could be exacerbating an already kind of tumultuous situation just because of the modern Western lifestyle. So the conversation about fish oil becomes very academic. Is, how do you concentrate it up? What is the proper ratio? And with 22,000 clinical studies on the benefits of fish oil, it really becomes almost like this academic war of which one is best, which one is worst. But what we do recognize is that there is a great way to extract some of those bad fats, concentrate it up, and then start to take a more concentrated fish oil. And this really becomes the education platform, right? Because people see fish oil and they equate it with omega-3. So you go to your Costco and you say, oh, fish oil, I'm going to take that. But it's, the hard challenge for us is to educate the consumer that if you see 1,000 milligrams of fish oil, it might only have 300 milligrams of omega-3s. And those are really the beneficial things that we're looking for.
And that's one of the things that we should be reading on the menu. I guess as you're describing, if we're looking at these labels and it has this menu of what's in there, you want to see how much of it is omega-3 versus fish oil. And this is the interesting thing, because my initial instinct would have been, well, listen, if it exists in the fish in nature this way in these ratios, then it's probably a good thing. But I guess what you're saying for the typical lifestyle, this is why you want to concentrate on the omega-3 side, because we're out of balance in the way that we're experiencing the rest of our lives.
Exactly. Yeah. And you look at the diet of man 200 years ago, and it wasn't Taco Bell, it wasn't McDonald's, it wasn't, the diet fad of the week, the keto, the Atkins, whatever it was. And so, we had more of a balanced diet, which included, for a lot of people, especially in coastal areas, kind of that Mediterranean diet, a lot of fresh fish, vegetables, things that really help to keep that ratio in check. And so this becomes kind of the fun thing, right? In the academic, people are like, oh, well, exactly like you said, well, this is how it was found in nature. But the problem is that we've changed our environment. We've changed the way that we eat. We changed the way that we live. So that argument of, well, this is how it was found in nature 200 years ago doesn't apply because we've kind of messed ourselves up. So it's really up to us in the dietary supplement world to address the needs of the modern consumer, to look at what we've done to our lives and then create products that, match those needs accordingly.
So we have a dilemma with the pollution in our oceans, right? And so now there's a concern saying, well, if we have fish that are sourced from polluted waters and we're concentrating their oils, how do we purify, or is there a methodology in purifying the oil so that you're not getting all this toxic stuff in it?
There is, and that is a great question, right? Because this is one of the things that, we have to acknowledge what we've done to our environment. The plastics, we've got an island the size of Texas, full of plastic floating in the ocean. There's actually sushi restaurants in Japan that are running Geiger counters over their fish because of Fukushima. So it's impossible to ignore what we've done to the supply chain in fish and fish oil. And luckily, there's some great technologies that allow us to extract all of that stuff out. Supercritical, superfluid chromatography, some stuff that really just uses CO2 as an extraction process. And there's a lot of Chinese companies that do fish oil extraction that will do harsh chemicals, that will do, some stuff that we don't want. But there's some great companies that really do it right. And as a result, GOED, which is a kind of a governing body for all fish oil, has set these standards of what you should be looking for. So I always tell people, when you're picking a fish oil, look for things like that. Look for your NSF labels. Look for your GOED labels. Look for those little icons.
Where would you see this? So there'll be basically certification icons that would be on the label.
Yeah.
So let's do those slowly, because this is why I want people to understand. Say, hey, you're about to buy a product. Look for this on the label so you know you're getting the right thing. So can you be a little bit more detailed about these certifications?
Yeah. So there's a couple things that I really think are important personally. MSC, Marine Stewardship Council, is one. That lets you know that product came from sustainably sourced fishing grounds. Mm-hmm. That's a big one, right? Because if we're just out fishing to fish, we're gonna lose our feedstock. Right. And I think so go the oceans. The rest of us are not far behind. So MSC is a big one. GOED, which is actually the global organization of EPA and DHA, it's a nonprofit organization that actually sets the limits on everything from heavy metals, all the toxicities associated in PCBs. And so they've created very strict regimens on what you can have in that fish oil. And if you don't pass that, then you don't get that.
Do they actually independently test, or do you just report to them?
They don't test, they set the standards, and then all of the companies out there that want to be in partnership with GOED have to provide test results that meet those GOED requirements. Yeah.
And you'd see, was that like a GOAD on a label?
GOED. Yep.
ED rather
Yep.
on a label. Okay.
Yep, you see that? I like NSF for sport, and all of these things. So, and then it becomes, so you see all of these logos on the back of a bottle, GOAD, Marine Stewardship Council, NSF for sport. And then it becomes a question of price, right? Because people are like, well, I can just buy this fish oil cheaper. Yes, you can. But the more that you see of those more certifications, the better the fish oil, the higher the concentration, you're going to pay for that. And then it becomes a question of, do you really value what you're putting in your body and what the end result is?
Well, and if you're going to spend money on putting something in your body, then I think it's implied, right?
Yeah.
That you value something. You're trying to take it. You're going to make an investment. And in fish oil, in some respects in nutrition, the context is, well, you have expensive urine, nothing's getting absorbed, so you're spending this money and it's washing right through you. That's a whole conversation in of itself. But fish oil can actually hurt you, right?
It can.
I mean, bad fish oil, not only will it not have a beneficial effect, it could actually have a deleterious effect.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's there's so many things that we talk about, right? It's like, and I always do this a thought experiment, right? Is go to your freezer, take a fillet of salmon out, put it on your counter, and then walk away from your house for a month and come back. And what is your house going to smell like, right? So that's oxidized fish.
Right.
And if that fish oil is not produced properly and it's oxidized like that, it's the same thing. Are you going to sit down at your kitchen table and eat that 3-month-old or month-old salmon? Probably not. But yet, because it's in a soft gel and because it's got a pretty label on it, people are like, oh, it must be good for me. And that really becomes a problem, right? Is these fat-soluble vitamins, if they're toxic, they're seeping into our system, they're staying there, they're not water-soluble, so we're not really peeing them out. And they can have a major detrimental impact on people's health and wellness journeys.
So you're at the top of the supply chain now in this arena. And for a lot of the retail products that consumers are buying right now, or the prescription side of this, which I'd like to say, is there really a difference between the two? We could talk about that in a moment. But you're supplying both sides of this, down the chain. So you're sourcing, and then you guys have a manufacturing practice that I'm assuming is compliant with all these things that you're talking about. So speak to that for a moment. Like, what is your process that makes your fish oil high quality?
Great question. So we've got that 1812, right? That stuff that's in South America, and you do your little Indiana Jones map, and it goes across the Atlantic to Bexbach, Germany, which is the most landlocked place for fish oil. I still haven't quite figured out the logistics on this one, but there's a great plant there, and this plant has 5 different extraction technologies, and that's urea precipitation, superfluid chromatography, supercritical extraction, silver nitrate, and all of these really cool technologies are used to basically separate out the constituent parts of the fish oil. EPA, DHA, DPA, cholesterol, sat, fat, omega-6. And then so what we're left with are just lakes of these constituent parts that are clean. They've been processed, they've been validated to remove all of those toxins, the PCBs, and so you have this great clean oil. And then we get to kind of put them back together, for different things. And so the beauty of fish oil, or the beauty of omegas, is that with 22,000 clinical studies, each one kind of focuses on something different. We've got EPA as like, oh, this is your heart healthy, joint healthy product. We've got DHA, which is your brain, your eye, your prenatal. Right now we're talking about DPA, which is fascinating because the whole conversation about fish oil originated when Dr. Jorn Dyerberg gets on a sled with some dogs and goes up and studies the Inuit population because he wants to understand why they have the lowest incidence of cardiovascular disease per capita, and especially in a place where they're not exactly living off of fresh fruit and vegetables and things like that. So he gets up there and he finds that their predominant dietary staple is DPA, which now we kind of call the missing omega. So he comes back and he publishes his findings, and everyone is like, oh, hey, this is a great thing. We should be doing this, for general health and wellness. But the problem is that there wasn't a viable source of DPA at the time unless we wanted to go club a baby seal. And most people aren't going to feel really good about taking that pill. So we turned to the next best thing, which was EPA and DHA from these fish. So the whole industry has been evolving with the science. What's commercially viable? What can we study? And so now we're at that place where we've got all of these different parts of the fish oil, the omegas, and we can put them back together in really cool combinations. Something that for prenatal really focuses on eye and brain health with the DHA, but throw some EPA in there. So you're talking about inflammation resolution. So it's fascinating science, and we've just really kind of scratched the surface in the last 10 years on what these polyunsaturated fatty acids can do if they're made properly.
Now, is there currently any conclusion around the right ratios or the best ratios based on all these, these 22,000 studies?
Personally, I think it's like 1 to 1.
Yeah.
1 to 1 to 1, and throw some DPA in there for good measure. What really we need to be doing, though, is looking at kind of from a holistic perspective, right? If you're just looking at fish oil to solve all of your problems and you're not eating healthy and you're not working out and you're not kind of doing all the other things, it's not a silver bullet.
Right.
But if you are doing a lot of those other things, then your body is really good at kind of optimizing what you're taking in. And so a lot of the research is showing that it really doesn't matter as long as you're taking in the higher concentrates and allowing it to metabolize properly.
So if you were going to store to buy a fish oil supplement for yourself, so I know that like you're saying, hey, it's debatable, et cetera, but if you were looking at the label, what ratio would you get for yourself?
I like 1 to 1.
Okay.
And here's something interesting, right? So, when we come into the world, breastfeeding, our predominant omega source during the time that our brains actually grow the most is DHA. And then it's interesting, right? Because, you're breastfeeding, you're getting a lot of DHA. You're actually getting a lot of something called alpha GPC, which is a phospholipid, which really helps in the absorption of these polyunsaturated fatty acids, especially when we're an infant. And then most people stop breastfeeding between 6 and 12 months, according to the American College of OBGYNs. And then from there, we don't really take in a lot of omegas. Not a lot of 1 and 2-year-olds like fillets of salmon. They like mac and cheese. And so there's really this interesting evolutionary process when we look at our intake of these omegas. So most people will go till like their 30s, 40s, sometimes 50s, and then they start taking EPA.
Right.
But really a lot of cognitive decline, a lot of the issues that we see, especially nowadays with the number of people being diagnosed with Alzheimer's and dementia, is systemic from lack of DHA in the brain. So I'm a big believer that you kind of have to have that. I mean, that's really, if you don't have your brain, you don't have anything. So, keeping our brains healthy, our eyes healthy with DHA. And we can't ignore all of the screen time. We can't ignore what we're doing to our eyes. So having that one in there is kind of essential. But I also like the joints. I also like the cardiovascular benefits of EPA. So 1 to 1 is, to add, a really long answer is 1 to 1.
Okay, if we look at the consumer products versus the prescription products, I have to imagine one difference is the fact that in the prescription product, it was used in clinical trials that where health claims could be made that otherwise can't be made. But as far as what's actually in the pill, is it really any different? No. Okay. In a word, no.
No. In a big word, no.
Yeah.
But omegas are really that one that exists in a gray area, right? Because there's all of this clinical work that's been done for the prescription products. The ones that are being used to lower cholesterol levels or to help augment healthy cholesterol. But there's really no difference. It's the same stuff. Wow. It's.
And as your company's supplying it, I mean, literally, and not kind of abstractly the same stuff. It's literally the same stuff.
Yeah.
Wow.
No, and there are some varying differences, right? So you look at some of the prescription products, and those might be really higher dosages. And typically what we find in this one is that a clinical dose is used to fix a problem. You've been diagnosed with some cardiovascular issue. You've got cholesterol issues. So the difference really is not necessarily the product itself, but it's the dosage. It's like you need 4 grams of this really high concentrate EPA to address your triglyceride levels. Right. Whereas for the rest of us who are just looking to maintain, a health and wellness journey, the lower dosage, you could get away with 1 or 2 grams. So that's really the biggest, deciding factor there.
And as far as the daily amount that someone would take for supplementary purposes, what do you recommend?
That's a great question, right? And I think I'm going to answer this in kind of a long way because I talk a lot about this in podcasts and on TV when we're discussing omegas or anything in the dietary supplement industry. But the problem is our advice on what we're taking and why we're taking it is usually coming from the way wrong person, right? It's the mailman. It's your sister. It's, Google, which we know is always true, right? So you have these data points that they're so subjective. I always recommend, use a diagnostic test to figure out why or if you should be taking something. And with omegas, there's a great one. You can go to your doctor and you can get a lipid profile. You can go to Omega Quant, and you can get they'll send you a kit at home. You get you prick your finger, send in a dried blood spot, and then they'll actually tell you, where your omegas are. They actually have this really cool thing called an omega index. And it's kind of interesting, right? Because it's after 30 years of all of this research, they've been able to quantify this scale. And they said that the average American exists between a 2 and a 3 on this scale. And if you can get to an 8, you're 5 times more likely to reach your 80s without incidence of Alzheimer's, dementia, or cardiovascular disease. So with this test, you can basically say, okay, now I know how much I need to take. And there's some really cool graphs in there. Say, okay, if you want to get to an 8 based off your age, your body weight, and all of this, you take X.
It's Omega Quant.
Omega Quant, yes.
So you could Google that and you'll be able to find it, and it's a self-test.
It's a self-test, yeah.
Wow.
Or you can go to your doctor and get a lipid profile. But the great thing about these tests it gives us a roadmap to success for supplements, right? Otherwise, we're just taking things in a vacuum. But if we actually take a diagnostic test and say, okay, this is where I want to be, then we get to back into what we should be taking, how much we should be taking, and how often.
What's great about that is, because supplementation typically is a shot in the dark, right? So what's great about this is having an outcome, saying not only is it telling me that I need it, but I can also see if after taking it for a while, it's having any effect, or my body's utilizing it.
Absolutely.
So that's a really great piece of advice. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
And then I imagine that the logic is that if you're lower on that scale, you want to take more quantities of it until you see yourself getting up higher, and then you'd start to maybe back it down.
Yeah. And here's something else interesting, right? The problem with the supplement industry is that it has to make money, right?
Yeah.
But it makes a lot of money. As we know, this is, $100 billion annual business globally. What a lot of these brand marketers will not tell you is that you shouldn't be taking this every day, right? It's still kind of a pharmaceutical model. So we want you to take our product every single day. That's how we get EBITDA. I'm a big believer in fat cycling, right? Don't take a omega-3 every single day. Take it for 6 weeks and then take a couple weeks off. Allow your body to metabolize a lot of that stuff. Let it be hungry for more of those. So, if some of those fat solubles are kind of starting to go a little rancid in your system, allow your body to metabolize those. Get off of, get it out of your system, and then, start back up again.
So that's, actually something that I believe the thinking around that is becoming more prevalent now, saying, it shouldn't be one thing consistently throughout your life. There's got to be cycling, because that would mimic kind of ancestral patterns.
Exactly.
Yeah. So.
But that's very contrary to the commercial aspects of the dietary supplement industry.
And kind of contrary to the way that humans like to behave. They like their rituals, right?
Yeah.
In order for something to become a part of their life, get up, brush your teeth, take your supplement, and you just want to do that every single day. So it becomes sort of mindless. And it happens, as compared to saying, on my calendar after 6 weeks, I'm going to say, okay, we're going to remind myself to stop taking certain supplements, and remind myself again some weeks later. So so this stuff becomes work, but that's what achievement requires, is
exactly
some conscious attention, saying don't be mindless about it, put some thought into it. So I could feel good about the fact that I'm buying a quality product based on the recommendations you made, looking for certain certifications, et cetera, that I'm not going to go to my doctor for a prescription to get a better product than the one that I could buy off the shelf, as long as I'm doing my research and my homework on it. And that's kind of an important thing, saying I'm self-empowered. I don't have to do this through a physician.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's the great thing about a lot of physicians right now is we're starting to see that more open mindset. It's not just let's pump you full of pharmaceutical products and mask a problem. It's let's integrate a lot of different things in this holistic approach to people's health, their health journeys. And so, the internet, all of these dietary supplements, all of the information available allows people to be a little bit more in control. I always recommend, if you're taking something, run it by your doctor, run it by your physician, but make sure your physician is open to that. If they're not a physician that's, in any way believes in dietary supplements, well, what answer are you going to get?
Right.
So if you're working with a good practitioner, you're looking at blood results, blood tests. If you're actually taking supplements for the right reasons, then they can have such a profound impact, right? And that's one of the big things I always laugh about is, why are you taking it? I mean, that's the big question you should always ask yourself when you're putting a pill in your mouth is why?
Right.
Is it because my mailman told me so? Or is it because my doctor looked at my blood work and said, well, you should really do this. You're anemic. Let's put you on a great iron for 6 months and then we'll reevaluate.
Or if you saw the infomercial or what have you.
Exactly.
There's certainly a lot of marketing in that $100 billion industry.
A lot.
And maybe that's something else we could speak to in a moment. But backing up to your last point, most, I would say, typical or traditional medical physicians probably aren't that experienced in understanding supplementation, its applications, how to identify what might be useful, et cetera. So how do you find a doctor that you can have consultation with around this?
I think, looking at someone that is a great question. And I think, if you're looking at a traditional hospital setting, that's going to be challenging, right? Because the typical doctor setting is really it's a machine shop. It's that doctor has to see X number of patients a day. That means they can only spend X number of minutes. It's like you're not going to have that conversation. But if you actually Google certain doctors, just doctors who are more holistic, you're going to find some people, and it requires a little work. Like you said, it's you gotta dig deep, but it's just like anything. Interview these people. They're going to be along for the ride of your life. This is the person that's going to be riding shotgun in everything that you want to accomplish in your health and wellness journey. Make sure it's a good fit.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with interviewing 5, 10, 20 doctors until you find that person that gets you. It's like, it's swipe left, swipe right, and find the right one. And maybe that's a great app. Let's,
So you might just come up with a great idea right on the spot here. You're walking down the hall and you can swipe one way or the other, saying which doctor in this building is the one that's the right one for me. That's great. So now, if I'm entering maybe the general world of nutrition, which I'm sure you have familiarity with.
Do a lot of products in that as well.
Yeah, so you do a lot of products in that arena. What are some other considerations? Like you're saying, here's the top 3 things consumers should be wary of in the general supplementation world. Like I have people ask me all the time. I'll just give you an example. What is the best multivitamin? I'm trying to get it all cover all my bases. What kind of advice do you give people?
That's another great question. Here's my thing. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you would walk into a vitamin retail shop and you could expect that they were going to do their due diligence, that company was going to do the due diligence to put quality products on the shelf. The internet has changed all of that. Yeah. Amazon has changed all of that. So there's no real system of checks and balances in the e-commerce platform that says this company, Joe's supplement company from, who knows where, has done the due diligence to put quality products in that jar, in that bottle. So when it comes to those, I'm always really leery of a e-commerce only company and one that's not willing to put their, C of A's on, on the website.
C of A's.
A certificate of, authenticity or, so that shows actually what the test results are. Now, there's a great company in the e-commerce space called iHerb.com, and they're the second largest vitamin retailer globally behind Amazon, and they wholesale everybody's products. You can't get on their website unless your specs meet their independent tests, and they put that on every single product. So you can go to iHerb and you can look at anything, whether it's a vitamin C, a multivitamin, an omega, and you can click on that product and you can see all of the testing that was done to validate that everything that's on that label is what's actually in that bottle.
Yeah, so and that's you're hoping that you have somebody that's got some expertise in the arena that can kind of filter that for you. So and you feel good about iHerb that's a good source that does their due diligence.
It is, and the beauty is that they collect products from all over the world, so it's not just their brand or one specific brand. So you can look. If someone says you need to be on an omega, well, you can go there and you can say, well, here are the top 3 selling omegas, and I look at them and it's like, you can actually do your research there. Amazon doesn't have that. No. So you type in omegas or vitamin C or multivitamin, and you've got 30,000 options, and there's no guarantee that if you hit that buy button, that what shows up on your door the next day through Amazon Prime is actually what's in that bottle is what's on that label. So it becomes a little bit more work for the consumer to really vet these products. And then I say from that point is once you vet a product, look at that company as a whole. Does that company have multiple products that you should be looking at? And there are some great brands out there that do things very well. And with that comes a little bit of cost. So I always say, if you want good, you're going to have to pay for it. But, you put good in, you're going to get good out.
Right. It's actually a better investment than saying, I got something cheaper that does nothing for me.
Exactly.
Throwing your money away.
Well, and I think, to that point is like on some of that cheaper stuff, worst case scenario or best case scenario, maybe it does something, maybe it does nothing. Worst case scenario is you could actually be harming yourself. And that's something to be aware of when it comes to that little extra investment. We're looking for more time, right? That's what all of this is. It's about giving ourselves more time to do the things that we want to do. No one takes a supplement thinking, well, I'm going to die tomorrow. It's all about time. So, extrapolate that concept over 10, 20, 30 years. If general health and wellness, if living the life of your dreams is what you're going after, why not put the best stuff in your body?
Supplement industry has got a history of, how could I put it, fads that come in and out, right? So fish oil, here to stay, not a fad?
Oh, it's definitely.
Yeah.
It's funny. I'm finishing up another book on fish oil, and so I've got a couple books on fish oil. But this one is actually the history of it, and I look at my personal history of fish oil. I come from a very Italian family. My grandmother, off the boat, and this Italians back in the 20s and 30s, cod liver oil, right?
Yeah.
So one of the most traumatic experiences of my life. I'm 5 years old, and my grandmother, love her to death. I mean, she was a pioneer in like alternative lifestyle, alternative supplements. Back before there was an internet, comes at me with that spoonful of cod liver oil, and the sweet, amazing grandmother instantly transformed into geriatric beast from hell with that horrible smelling stuff. But it's interesting, right? That is a product that's existed for centuries.
Right.
And it's great because a lot of these Mediterranean countries, a lot of global countries have known the benefits of fish and omega-3s. Right. It's just now with the research that we're finding out why so it's definitely here to stay.
And they're able to infuse a little lemon with it now, so it's
exactly. Yeah.
Well, and that's actually another question. Do you see a preference there as far as taking it, from a spoon versus, encapsulated?
It's I think it's just personal preference. Yeah. Bioavailability, one of the biggest buzzwords in the industry, is not impacted from liquid to soft gel. Right. What we are seeing, and this is the conversation that's taking place in the omega industry, is how do you structure that lipid so your body absorbs more of it? Right. And that's usually adding some type of phospholipid to it, a phosphatidylcholine or a GPC, or taking a krill oil, which has a natural component to that. Or even as we look at some of the downstream metabolites of omegas, getting into these resolvins, protectants, myricins. It's kind of it's one of the oldest supplements on the planet, besides CBD, but we're just starting to kind of peel back the layers of the science and figure out how these things work and how we can make them better.
You just brought up the new fad. Maybe
the new fad,
maybe
yes.
not, CBD. So talk to me about CBD. Are you guys involved in CBD?
Heavily, okay. Yeah.
So heavily. Okay, so this is because this is kind of a big deal. It's emerging right now. In the last 2 years, it's kind of exploded. So, what's your perspective on CBD?
I just wrote a really interesting research paper on CBD, and I started doing the history, the deep dive on it. And, when you go back 10,000 years ago in China, 5,000 years ago in India, hemp is one of the oldest medicinal compounds on the planet. And then interestingly enough, you kind of look at the American history of this. George Washington grew this in his front yard. At one point in American history, it was illegal for the largest farms not to grow hemp, not only for the medicinal purposes, but the fibers for rope and the clothing. And then the cotton industry comes along. And so, typical of anything is one industry pushes out another one. So cotton becomes the big cash crop. And then in the 1930s, marijuana becomes demonized in what is basically a reverse immigration policy. So in California, they were looking to control the migrant population. And so what they said was, literally in the letter of the law, is that Mexican men were coming across the border, smoking marijuana, getting high, and soliciting sex from white women. So in that law, it became a way to detain and export migrant workers. Now, that was later overturned by the Supreme Court, but then in the 1960s, CBD, marijuana, all of this becomes a Schedule I drug, from the DEA. And that's on the same list as cocaine, as, heroin, as opium. And so
Schedule I is the worst.
Schedule I is the worst. I mean, this is the stuff that kills people. Right. And we've got a plant on there. Yeah. We've got a plant that makes rope and fibers. And it's interesting. When CBD kind of first hit the market, especially in the the manufacturing side, and the extraction technology for CBD or full spectrum phytocannabinoids is exactly the same as fish oil. So there's a lot of parallels in this. But we start hearing about it and we start talking about it as a company. And I grew up in the just say no generation. I grew up playing sports. So you wanted to play sports, you don't do drugs. Mm-hmm. So I start hearing CBD, I start hearing hemp, and I have this visceral reaction. That's a drug. I'm not going anywhere near it. So then as a scientist, it took me 6 months of really looking at the research, of really understanding this to say, that's not a drug, it's a plant. Mm-hmm. So then, we have this whole fad. We have the hemp farm bill that just passed, 6 days ago? Right. We have this big booming industry around CBD and full spectrum phytocannabinoids. Do I think that there's a lot here? Absolutely. Do I think that it might be a little too early on this one? Absolutely. I mean, there's some incredible benefits from this particular product, but I don't know if it's the panacea that everyone thinks it is. So there's going to be a lot of great research that comes out of it, but we really have to be, I think, cautiously optimistic as we start talking about this in therapeutic ways.
Does the CBD in and of itself, if you separate out all the THC, will it still have, or is it proposed that there's a beneficial effect to that, or does there need to be, a certain amount of THC in it for it to be effective?
A great academic conversations, right? So CBD and THC, two of the most prevalent of the 113 unique phytocannabinoids that comes from hemp. The idea is that they're antagonistic to each other, but then there is some synergies that takes place. So when you completely remove the THC and just leave the rest of the full spectrum phytocannabinoids, or even just isolate the CBD, the academic approach right now seems to think that it's not as effective. But then even with the hemp farm bill passing, what does that mean, right? So even if little amounts of THC, this thing could possibly be legal now, but it's not legal in the sense that if I'm a mailman, a federal employee, and I now test positive for THC, it's not covered under that. So now I'm losing my job because Congress just said that we can have this product, but then the DEA and the FDA and the government said, well, you still can't test positive for THC. So there's a lot of work to be done on this one, and there's going to be a lot of headache. But personally, I think you kind of have to have the synergistic blend of all of those.
Yeah.
We can talk a lot about the Epidural X product, which is the GW Pharma's company's childhood epilepsy product. That was the first FDA-approved CBD isolate product. We've got, I believe, 3 new pending drug applications at the FDA for CBD-based products. So not only is there a lot of cool stuff coming down the pike, but there's an ultimate battle royale between dietary supplement and big pharma on this.
I was going to say, and that's kind of like this epic battle, that comes up because it's the speed of change and adoption on this, to me, has been startling. And we're going from, as you said, something that's completely vilified, and any reference point to marijuana, pot, hemp. Now suddenly, there's this explosion of, wait a minute, we've got this all wrong, and now you got to take entrenched ideas around it and dogma, really, and then you have to unwind it. And then, as you said, it's kind of multidimensional. You've got federal laws about you can't have this in your system, and at the same time, you got federal law saying we could farm it, produce it. So this is going to be kind of a cluster,
absolutely,
for a while,
of epic proportions.
Yeah. But now I'm the consumer saying, but wait a minute, there's some new, for lack of a better term, miracle supplement for me. And I want to maybe say, okay, I want to dip my toe in this water. What should I be looking for if I want to get CBD oil?
That might be the best question of all right now, and there's a multi-pronged answer to that one. First of all, I think continuity and consistency is key, right? So you've got all of these delivery systems. You've got gummies, you've got chocolates, you've got tinctures, you've got, the list goes on and on and on. The problem is that you don't have content uniformity in those delivery systems. So like the medical marijuana industry, like the CBD industry, with all of these different delivery systems, it's really been difficult to create a baseline of how does this stuff work? And so each person's reaction, each person's experience is different. I like to change that. I like to kind of just, go scientific and say, start with a soft gel. Start with something that's been tested for content uniformity. You know exactly what you're getting in every single soft gel. And you take that and you start with your 5 milligrams. Does that work for you? If it does, great. If not, titrate up a little bit. Go to 10. There's a lot of stuff out there that says, just go take 200 milligrams of CBD. If you've never taken that before, you could be falling asleep at the wheel. You could be, Now, granted, there's a great Facebook meme I saw, and it's like the number of CBD-related deaths is now equal to that of the number of people gored to death by unicorns. So it's, there's not anything that's catastrophic that's going to happen if you're taking 200 milligrams of CBD. But if you're trying to go to work and be productive, and you're just staring at the wall because it has that kind of impact on you, don't do that. Be intelligent. Start small and work your way up.
Now, your company's making a big play into this arena, though.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, what's the plan? As far as for you guys looking at your future, how does CBD fit in?
Well, it's much like omegas, right? So you have all of these unique constituent parts. With omegas, you only have like 3 or 4: EPA, DHA, DPA. with CBD or with full spectrum phytocannabinoids, you have 113. And what we're noticing is that each one of these phytocannabinoids might have a unique impact on a specific condition. So as we break this whole thing apart, then we can start looking at putting these things back together in very cool ratios to attack things like anxiety, sleep, weight management. This is a big one. So there's a lot of preliminary research that says that CBD is good for appetite control. How many people are stress eaters?
Yeah.
I know me personally, like if I'm bored, like I eat when I'm bored. I walk around the house, I open up the refrigerator, I'm like, oh, that looks good. Or I'll do the lap and I'll close the refrigerator, walk back because something might magically appear in the, but how many people do that are stress eaters?
Yeah.
Sleep, that's one of the biggest things, right?
Huge.
We've got blue light activation at night. People are glued to their phones, cortisol levels. All of these inflammatory markers and stress markers are so high in America right now. We need something.
And sleep medication, is one of the most prescribed drugs out there. And what's more natural than sleep? And of course, you're trading one problem for another when you're relying on these pharmaceuticals
Absolutely.
for rest as compared to a natural compound.
Yeah, and I think it's funny. I was doing a talk a couple weeks ago, and I said, I start off, and I think it's like 200 people in the audience. I said, biological functions aside, what's the first thing you do in the morning? People kind of look around, and eventually someone says, I look at my phone. I'm like, yeah. And most people do that, right? They wake up, they might not even get out of bed and they're looking at their phone.
Yeah.
Is it email? Is it Instagram? FOMO is now a clinical diagnosis, right? I'm like, people are freaked out because they missed something, that they saw on Instagram. So people are starting off with blue light activation and higher levels of stress. They go through their day, they sit in LA traffic. That alone is enough to, then you go home and most people are sitting in front of the TV, and then they wind down their day. And so then I ask, prior to going to bed, what's the last thing most of you do? People are like, look at my phone. Blue light activation. FOMO, all of these things. So it's no wonder, I think at the last report is like over 70% of Americans have trouble sleeping. And then you throw Ambien, Lunesta, some of these other ones on top of that, yeah, it's a Band-Aid for a broken leg. Right. But what we've seen, and especially some of the products that I've created for sleep, is that people are really lowering those levels, those stress levels, those stress chemicals, and they're able to enjoy better night's sleep. And that has a profound impact on your health. If you can't sleep, you're never going to recover.
Yeah. So it's exciting. It's exciting what might emerge here, and the fact that this old dogmatic stance is kind of being released, and now there's new possibility and opportunity.
Yeah.
And there you are, right in the middle of it. So
yeah, and I'm assuming we'll be right in the middle of all the legal that takes place. Cause it reminded. Do you remember the red yeast rice issue?
Yes.
Same thing. It's like that's exactly what it's going to be all over again, and. It's going to be a very interesting celebrity death match between Big Pharma and dietary supplements.
Well, I'll be there, observing it with great interest, and you'll be in there actually in the death match itself.
I think I will. What side I fall on remains to be seen, but it's one of those interesting things. There's so many great practitioners in the market. There's so many great brands in the market that I think could really take CBD or full spectrum phytocannabinoids to the next level and really help people as we uncover the science. And I think that's the thing of this, is that people have become so used to being sick and tired that they forgot what it's like to feel good.
Right.
And if we allow that product to end up more in a pharmacy company's hands, I think it's not going to get the full exposure that it needs to really help people remember what it's like to feel great.
Well, I'm in my own views, I think access to it should be not restricted, and you just have to again have consumers drive the market by making sure people have good practices. You keep using the term full spectrum, so should people, if they're looking for CBD right now or hemp oil, should they look for full spectrum?
Absolutely.
Hemp oil?
Yeah.
That's one of the things that they want to look for. Any other considerations to help them vet the product?
I think you should, like we talked about, kind of iHerb is, any company that puts their THC test on there. Because again, this is something where it might be legal. It might be legal in the state that you're in. Now that the hemp farm bill just passed, we're going to have some broad sweeping legislation that can change the legality of this in all states. But that does not mean, that your company acknowledges that. That doesn't mean that you could be taking a CBD product for sleep and then go test positive for THC. So I think it's paramount that you find a company that's reputable, that lists their THC tests. And I think the other thing about this is it's the gold rush, right? This is a land grab. Everyone's throwing up a website and saying, hey, I've got my CBD product. Right. I really recommend that you go with a company that doesn't have only CBD products. You know, find a company that's had a longevity in the dietary supplement space that hasn't built, you know, their entire business around one product. So they've done all of the legal research, they've done all of the vetting, and you can know that they're not hanging their hat on that one product, and they're not jeopardizing their entire business just to sell CBD and hop on a bandwagon.
Right, yeah, you don't want neophytes, but people who do this for a living and have a track record of it. Yeah,
Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, this has been more than stimulating and exciting, so thanks for sharing all this information with us. It's really
my pleasure.
Really useful, and I wish you a lot of success in your future fight on this issue.
Thank you very much. It's been great.
Incredible context to learn that many different manufacturers are getting their materials from common sources, and that this has a big impact on what you buy and how it's utilized in your body. So really enjoyed bringing this to you. Thanks for tuning in. Let's keep going. Why would people fly from all over the country to go to a particular doctor? Such is the case for my next interviewee, Dr. Ann Shippy. Dr. Shippy is a medical doctor who practices something called functional medicine, which you'll learn about in a few moments. I've often wondered myself, if I was a medical doctor and my only tool was to write a prescription for a drug no matter what types of problems people were having, it would feel inherently limited. Well, Dr. Shippy, in practicing functional medicine, has expanded her toolbox to include supplementation and applications of it in ways that are helping people all over the country. So you're going to learn a lot here. She has an amazing story, and I think it's going to inspire you and help you to a healthier future. Ann, thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Please tell me about who you are and what it is that you do.
I am Ann Shippy, and I am a functional medicine physician, but I came this path a little bit a circuitous route. I was a chemical engineer and I worked for IBM for 10 years and was really loving my career, and all of a sudden I got sick. I was on the fast track and making a really big contribution, and I couldn't get the answers that I needed from the medical community, and so I had to start figuring it out myself after going to about 8 or 9 different doctors. I was like, okay, it was before the internet. So I started reading everything that I could find, and then seeing some other types of practitioners. So I saw a nutritionist, an acupuncturist, a naturopath, an allergist who was doing some unusual things, and really changing my diet and taking some supplements, and finally figured out how to get myself well. And then one morning woke up and decided to go to medical school. And I've really found that functional medicine is a great way to do what I was trying to do for myself all those years ago, where I could really delve into their biochemistry and physiology and look for the most holistic way possible to help them get better. And a lot of times it does involve supplementation based on lab testing. So I do a lot of laboratory testing on my patients because they're really coming to me to do the detective work. You know, not just do the band-aiding of the symptoms, but really finding the root cause and then helping them to get better. So with my MD and with my functional medicine certification, I can combine the best of both worlds.
Most of the doctors that I've met in functional medicine typically were practicing in more of a conventional way. And then something happened. They got sick, a family member got sick, they exhausted all the traditional medical options, and then went into these alternative approaches to get well, and then the lights go on, they get excited, now they have a whole new kind of practice. For many of them, sadly, they also start to make less money. But now you came at it kind of the opposite way.
So I knew I wanted to practice medicine differently. I knew that there had to be a different approach. I didn't know what it was, but I knew I wanted the credibility and the foundation and the good things that an MD degree would bring, because there really is a time and a place for having the more acute care things that we do in allopathic medicine. But then once I finished medical school, I had a child in med school and a child in residency. So I had 2 young children when I was finished, and I was kind of tired doing med school in my 30s. So I went into just a regular traditional medical practice. I did that for about 3 years, 2.5 years, and I got sick again. I developed a couple of autoimmune disorders. And after going to the rheumatologist and knowing a lot about rheumatology myself, it's like, yeah, no, I'm not taking those medications. I need to, my kids are at the point where I feel like I can go back and do some additional training. And that's when I found functional medicine. They were the only people that I knew that were doing any training that really gets us back to the biochemistry and physiology and looks at the person as a whole. What's going on in your gut that can affect your brain, your skin, the whole rest of your body. So we look at the system as a whole.
Let's talk about autoimmune. This is one area where the illness is very chronic, and in conventional medical systems, people are even damaged over time by treatment. How do you normally deal with someone who comes in like that?
I love working on autoimmune disorders because I've seen such an amazing reversal with what I do. And in myself, in my own body, I got to experience that where, I had an autoimmune disorder that made me at an increased risk for having a stroke called antiphospholipid antibody. And then I also had the autoimmune disorder where your eyes and your mouth get very dry and extremely uncomfortable. So the problem with the way that we do things in allopathic medicine and just prescribe a medication is that the underlying process of what is causing the immune system to react abnormally and actually attack itself, that underlying cause is not addressed. And so what happens a lot of times is you go from one autoimmune disorder to the next, or other bad things really start happening if you don't get to the root cause. And that's really the problem with just suppressing the symptoms and suppressing the immune system with the medications that are used.
I know one of the areas that you're known for is mold. Can you talk a little bit about mold and what people can do about it?
So I think mold is an epidemic in our country and probably many places around the world because of how we're building buildings and because there's mold contamination in our food. The thing that I see the biggest impact from in my practice is from the building exposures. So a lot of times people think about mold as just the mold spores and that it's an allergen or it can cause asthma. Mm-hmm. But the biggest problem with mold is that it makes toxins. They're called mycotoxins or MBOCs, that the most toxic ones can cause things like cancer. They can be toxic for the liver, for the neurological system, poison the mitochondria, poison the cell membranes. So they can really affect any part of the body and cause a lot of symptoms and a lot of disorders. So there's a lot of research now that's coming out that's really linking the mycotoxins with almost every disorder that you find, including autoimmunity.
So when you have someone show up and you suspect mold, how do you help them?
So it can be very complex or it can be very simple. So sometimes it's just a matter of moving where they're living. But more often than not, the person has really built up a high amount of environmental toxins, including mold, in their body because they don't detoxify optimally or they've had a pretty big exposure. So then we have to use things like supplements to help get their detoxification pathways working more optimally. So the exciting thing is that people can be extremely ill. So one of my last health journeys was to get very sick from mold, which gave me the great opportunity to learn more about mold and how to help my patients better and to write books and speak on it so that people can be informed and not just be suffering from this hidden illness. So we do things like use liposomal glutathione and some of the natural binders like modified citrus pectin, clay, and charcoal to help to get the toxins out of their body. We can use some things like hyperbarics and infrared sauna, some clay and salt baths to really amplify the effects of the detoxification. And then a lot of times the people that are the sickest don't have methylation pathways that work very well. So there is a lot of supplementation that can actually help them methylate better, which means that they can do repair better and they can also clear the toxins from their body better, including heavy metals. I like to do pretty extensive testing when my patients can afford it because a lot of times it's not covered by insurance. So I like to look at the genes that they have that would predispose them to not methylating very well. And then we can now do some specialty labs where we can look at multiple places in the pathway of methylation and then see if it looks like it's working smoothly. So we can really optimize methylation so that they can, repair their DNA better and clear the toxins better and get just the right supplement program for them. Sometimes it takes a number of iterations to get it just fine-tuned for the particular person. And sometimes it's really simple. It's just a matter of adding some methylated folic acid and some B vitamins. But then other times it's more complicated, and we have to have zinc and special forms of B12 and choline and betaine, TMG, to really get things moving smoothly.
I'd like to get your perspective on this. When someone is already supplementing for their health, when is the right time for them to seek out a good functional medicine doctor to guide them along this path?
I think ideally everyone would seek out a functional medicine physician that really, really wants to be proactive about their health, because it's really easy to run the test to see things like, do I have enough magnesium? Is my methylation working properly? Am I detoxifying well? Does it look like my mitochondria are working effectively? So that's the ideal, but there's a limit on the number of functional medicine doctors, and a lot of people that's not reasonable, because a lot of functional medicine doctors can't spend the time with their patients and take insurance. So then there's certain principles, there are certain things that I see that really everybody needs. And one of them is magnesium. I get to check magnesium on almost all my patients inside the red blood cells, and it's astronomical. Like almost everybody is low in magnesium, and rarely are people in an optimum range. And magnesium is so critical for helping at least 300 enzymes in the body to work properly. So important for certain types of methylation that I talked about previously. And so there are certain things like magnesium, and then also supporting our detoxification pathways. What I'm seeing in my office is that almost everybody is, their barrels are filling up, because with the number of environmental pollutants that we're exposed to a little bit every day, and that building up in the body, so many people are getting to the point where their barrel is full and their health is starting to suffer as a consequence. So I think that everybody needs to be taking supplements that help to support their detoxification pathways. So things like liposomal glutathione, at least in small amounts, to augment the amount of glutathione that they already make in their body, and then some type of binder, so the clay, charcoal, modified citrus pectin, to keep the barrel from filling up and really help to prevent from getting so many illnesses that are related to environmental toxins. Even diabetes now has data that shows your weight is less of a risk than how many of the built up of environmental toxins you have in your body. And then the autoimmune diseases that we're seeing an epidemic around. And then cancer. So many things are related to where that barrel is filled up to with the toxins.
So with magnesium, does it matter what kind you take?
So I consider myself a connoisseur of several different supplements, and magnesium is one of them. My go-to form of magnesium is magnesium glycinate, because it, especially when people take it at night, it can help with relaxing and feeling more ready to go to sleep and staying asleep. But then I love the glycine part of it, because it also supports the detoxification pathways. But then I also have a couple of other forms. The other one that I like to use a lot is called Magnesium Theanine. And theanine is a very good supplement to really help support the brain.
Two areas that are attracting a lot of attention right now are brain health, brain function, and mitochondrial function. What do you recommend about those?
The brain function supplements and the mitochondrial supplements are so integrated. So the brain supplements that I really like include some of the mitochondrial supplements, but one of my favorite supplements for the brain is called phosphatidylcholine. So phosphatidylcholine is one of the forms of choline that really help to build healthy cell membranes. And we need healthy cell membranes to really have a healthy brain, because the brain is just chock full of good fats in those cell membranes. And our cell membranes have to be healthy to signal the cells exactly what to be doing correctly, and to have healthy receptors that are receiving those signals. Then with the mitochondrial support, I really love a supplement called MitoQ. It's a special form of CoQ10 that gets right into the mitochondria where they need to go, because it has a little charge on it. And then it really helps the mitochondria to make good energy. And that helps the entire body, especially the brain. And then when I put those three supplements together, the phosphatidylcholine, the MitoQ, and another one called nicotinamide D-riboside, I see tremendous impacts when people are feeling like they're having some cognitive decline. And then also with people who have had concussion syndromes. When I put those 3 supplements with something like hyperbaric, they can really get some dramatic improvement.
We actually interviewed the PhD who formulated the MitoQ supplement, and we were really impressed with him. Tell me what you like about it.
Well, one of the things that I love about Mitoq is that they do the research. So a lot of these companies that are providing supplements don't have the budget to be able to provide research. But Mitoq has really invested in doing research to show that their form of CoQ10 is very different than the other forms of CoQ10, in that you can use a very small amount of milligrams and see a tremendous difference in things like cognitive function and cardiovascular function. So it's really exciting that they're taking the research so seriously. And then I can take that research and see a difference in my patients. I can see the difference in how patients are their cognitive function and their cardiovascular function.
This is why I like to talk to people who are still working with patients. They're clinicians actually with the people in the field, seeing what is happening. Many times what the experiences of the clinician is not really matched to what the research might tell one. Like, for example, with SSRIs, clinicians were seeing suicides and the pharmaceutical company was saying, no, we did the research and it shows that there's no adverse effect as far as suicide was concerned. But then the clinicians had such robust feedback, it finally got the story out and people realized that these SSRIs were dangerous. So tell me if you see anything that's akin to that relative to supplementation, meaning what supplements are being given out there, and is there anything going on that you're experiencing maybe that doesn't match the research that people should know about?
So I really like my patients to run by me what they're taking, because a lot of times they will see something, see an advertisement and get all excited about it, and then it's not quite aligned with the other things that we have them doing. So I love it when they actually are doing research and bring me ideas about things, but I don't like them to start it until after they run it by me, because a lot of times there's actually a better solution than what they're seeing, or we're actually, if it's something like a resveratrol or Resveratrol type product, I want to make sure that they're getting the best quality. And then the other thing that drives me crazy is if they go and buy sub-quality supplements. So I love Costco and Sam's for certain things, but I think people really need to be careful about where they buy their supplements and the quality. So if people are trying to save money on the supplements, I think a lot of times they are probably getting substandard supplements that may not even have in it what they think they're supposed to have in it, or there might be environmental toxins. So especially things like turmeric, the research on that shows that it's heavily contaminated. So you really want to get most of your supplements from a company that's doing very meticulous incoming material checks to make sure they're not putting contaminants into the supplements that already came with the incoming materials.
Are there any brands that you like and trust that you can suggest to people? We don't have an interest in any of them, but we do have an interest in shining a light on them.
There are some companies that I think do a very good job, go above and beyond with their incoming quality controls. So I really like the ones that I'm such a connoisseur. I really do the due diligence to make sure that they have really good quality. So some of the companies that I recommend for patients are Thorne, Zymogen, Designs for Health, Premier Research. Research Nutritionals. They do an amazing job of really researching their products, and they also, do some of the clinical studies to show that they work. And then Quicksilver does a really good job, and they're very careful about the liposomal carriers. So there are certain things that I really like to recommend in a liposomal form, because that means they don't have to go through the digestive system quite the same way. They can just get absorbed and go right into the bloodstream very quickly. There's a particular product called Neo 40. It's a lozenge that helps to increase nitric oxide. I love that for some of my athletes, that they really benefit from having a high nitric oxide level. And then it also really helps with when people go to high altitude, like for here in Texas, being close to sea level and then going to altitude, a lot of people experience altitude sickness. It can be super beneficial from that. So one of the areas that I'm a connoisseur of is liposomal glutathione. So I work with about 6 or 7 different forms of liposomal glutathione because most of the forms don't taste very good or smell very good. And depending on what the underlying ingredient is. So there's really some great forms of the liposomal glutathione, Research Nutritionals, Quicksilver, Essential Pro.
So if you can leave some of the most important things that people could do to better their life and health, what would the top 3 to 5 be?
I think everybody needs to be taking a form of magnesium. I think most people would benefit from a B complex. I think most people would benefit from doing some things that would help with detoxification, the liposomal glutathione, things like NAC, milk thistle that really help to get things out of the body, and then add in a binder like pectosol or clay or charcoal. I think most people would benefit from doing some form of mitochondrial support because most of us are mitochondria really getting affected by environmental toxins, including mold. So CoQ10 and nicotinamide D-riboside, along with the B vitamins that I mentioned earlier. And I think people can do, even if you're feeling great, you can do a lot of prevention by taking those basic things every day.
A minute ago, you talked about combining CoQ10 with NAD, and it has a really enhanced effect. Is there any other stacks like that you find work real well?
Yes, especially with detoxification. So with the more aspects of the physiology that you support, the better things can work. So detoxification is very complex. And when you are able to address each part of detoxification, which really is running on nutrients, and so many people are deficient. So when you support the liver, when you support the kidney, and when you support the gut, and then at a cellular level, even adding in the mitochondrial support, it all works much smoother and is more effective. A lot of these supplements are very synergistic together. So a little bit of this and a little bit of that is more powerful than a whole lot of one thing. So I really look for ways to get more effect out of each thing that the person is taking.
So do you have an example of something like this?
So with detoxification, when we support the phase 1 part of detoxification, there's a supplement called Metalloclair, which really starts to get things moving at a cellular level. And then with phase 2 part of detoxification, the things like the liposomal glutathione and the glycine to grab it and get it ready to go the rest of the way. And then with the exiting the body, you want to be supporting the gallbladder and the liver with some of the gallbladder supplements, and then the kidney and the gut to really keep things moving. Because one of the really important things for detoxification is to have the bowels moving on a very regular basis. More than once a day is really optimal. So it's using whatever supplementation and dietary changes it takes to do that. One of the other things that I didn't talk about is how important having the diet with the best diet with the supplements. I think a lot of times people think, oh, I'm just going to take these supplements and I'm not going to worry so much about my diet. But that's actually a really great place for synergy, because if you're eating a low inflammation, high nutrient diet, that's an even better foundation for the supplements to work even better. So I consider the high inflammation foods, the gluten, dairy, grains, the moldy foods like peanuts, you want to get those out, and then add in lots of vegetables, especially the cruciferous vegetables, the broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, and kale. But we're not getting the food that's as nutrient dense as we had 20 years ago, 50 years ago, because the soil's getting so depleted. So we need a lot of those trace minerals added in to the supplements as well. So even a good multivitamin or taking a mineral concentrate can be super helpful for adding in. I consider supplements a really important tool in my practice. I get patients that are extremely ill a lot of times, with very severe disorders. And if I didn't have supplements to really help dial in where their biochemistry and physiology is disrupted, I wouldn't be able to help my patients the way that they need to be helped. So when I see things like the legislation or the FDA trying to crank down on what we can recommend and prescribe and access to supplements, it's really concerning. I think it's a right for people to be able to access supplements so that they can help their biochemistry and physiology work better and that they can heal. It's so critical to not have tighter controls on what we can recommend, but we should have more trust and confidence that the supplements that we're buying are high quality.
If people are looking for a good functional medicine doctor, how can they find one?
There's a website called functionalmedicine.org that you can look up by your zip code and a 100-mile radius, and you'll come up with a list of doctors. Look for the ones that are certified first. Call the office, talk to the staff. When you talk to the staff, you get a pretty good idea of how things are going to run. Ask a few questions to screen them a little bit, and then pick the one that you like the best.
That's terrific. Ann, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
I love it when I experience healthcare providers that see a new and better vision for the people they serve. They've got the guts to be able to go off of the conventional path to higher ground to help people in more profound ways. And that's what I took away from this interview. I hope it inspired you. My next interview has already had an impact on my life. As a matter of fact, I'm looking to the right off camera and I see our producer, Jeff Hayes, holding a bottle with Cardio Miracle in it. And off to my left, Elliot is right in front of my bottle with Cardio Miracle. We're drinking this stuff. Why? Because John Hewlett is contagious in his enthusiasm for nitric oxide. And he has a product that has that and other things in it. And his message is so compelling that we couldn't resist. So you're not going to be bored for half a second during this interview. This man is just the expression of excitement and commitment to the things he does in this world. He's changed his career and committed his life because of what he found in the world of supplementation. And I'm really, really excited to share this with you right now. So John, I'm excited to have this conversation because I show up here in the morning to do this interview, and there's a guy there fully animated, full of life, and he said, I haven't had any coffee. So you must be excited about something.
I'm excited to talk about supplements, supplementation, and I'm really excited to talk about nitric oxide.
All right, so I need to clear the big elephant out of the room because we met and you have this bubbling enthusiasm about your product and this whole phenomenon. And I know my partner, Jeff Hayes, said, you're going to just have to disclaim this up front. This is not an infomercial for your product, but we know that you can't help but talk about it. It's just going to be coming up. So we appreciate that enthusiasm. We want people to learn what they need to learn, but we also know that it's going to be inescapable for you to talk about what you formulated and why you're so excited about it. And it's a genuine excitement. So let's find out how you got to what you're doing today.
Well, I spent 40 years in the financial services world, Patrick, and about 12 years ago, I had a routine appendectomy that went bad, and I had every complication known to man and almost didn't come out of the hospital. Actually, they sent me home early. I was internally bleeding. I went back that night with the emergency room, and after 2 or 3 different medical things that they did that were not the best, I almost died several times. And when I finally got out of the hospital from this routine appendectomy, I was in such bad shape that I had heard about the science of nitric oxide had just started emerging from the Nobel Prize in 1998. This was 2007, about 10 years later. So I decided to look into it because as I left the hospital from almost being killed in my appendectomy, it ended up that they wanted to do quadruple bypass, and there was no way I was going to, if an appendectomy can have that many problems, I was not going to do quadruple bypass. So I heard about nitric oxide. I flew to Palo Alto to meet some of the top experts in the field that had emerged from the Nobel Prize, and started taking a nitric oxide supplement that was being marketed by a direct sales company. And within 6 weeks, my health was turning around. And so I thought, my goodness, this supplementation would have saved my father's life, who died at 62. My uncle at 57, all of heart disease, which was a genetic challenge in our family. So I walked away from a multi-million-dollar financial business and became kind of a zealous advocate for the discovery and the value of nitric oxide being supplemented in a person's diet and in their life.
Well, let's talk about some of the science and the research behind all this. Like you went to Palo Alto. What did these scientists tell you?
Well, I met with a practicing endocrinologist who had spent a lot of time, about 10 years since the Nobel Prize, and he had been giving it to his patients. And it had dramatic impact on their diabetes and their complications of their diabetes, because nitric oxide is the body's strongest and most effective antioxidant and even anti-inflammatory. And so when I learned about that science and then met with some of the other people at Stanford, I thought, why doesn't the world know about this?
How does this all relate to your heart?
Well, it ended up that the Nobel Prize in 1998, actually in the documentation of the Nobel Prize, it says that it reverses arterial plaque. And it has a dramatic impact on healing even the heart muscle. And so, my goodness, I said to myself 10 years later, if the Nobel Prize declaration says that this reverses arterial plaque, why don't we know about this? And so I thought, maybe I need to help spread the word. So I spent the next 7 years helping that particular supplement type company raise the awareness. I met with all the doctors. I debated with all the chiropractors and the osteopaths and the nurse practitioners and other nutritionists who didn't even know about it, most of them. And then after a few years, I found that the company I was working with just wasn't as motivated to continue to improve the science. And so I eventually, in frustration, left another very successful career and said, I guess I need to do this myself and implement all the cutting edge types of deliveries of nitric oxide that had emerged since the Nobel Prize, which was how citrulline fits into the arginine aspect, how beetroot powder also has a nitric oxide effect, how kale and spinach and green vegetables have an impact on the nitric oxide production in your body. So with all of that information that was emerging, I decided there needed to be a better approach and a formulation that took all of those positive things and put it into one particular drink.
What do you think maybe one of the biggest misconceptions about nitric oxide is, or maybe something that people get wrong?
Well, I think one of the things that happened is when nitric oxide first came to the forefront with the Nobel Prize, it was based all upon arginine. And with the arginine, so the bodybuilders also, because the nitric oxide increases blood flow, it dilates the artery. It's an anti-inflammatory, and it's been proven that it actually helps with healing the endothelial wall that lines all of the arteries and all of the organs of the body. So as it heals it, that's why the plaque eventually is absorbed out through the lymphatic system. But the reality is that nitric oxide is not just a vasodilator. And originally, the people who got really excited about it were the bodybuilders. So they were taking 30, 40 grams of arginine, and they were getting a great pump.
Why arginine? So
Well, arginine is the body's mechanism that triggers the lining of the artery to create nitric oxide.
I see.
And so it's the amino acid arginine that does that. And so initially people got really excited about taking lots of arginine, get lots of blood flow, increase the pump, and they would build up their muscles. Well, as time went on, they realized that arginine triggering excessive nitric oxide could become a free radical. Too much of a good thing.
Right.
And so without buffering it with antioxidants and other important ingredients, that it actually could become damaging. And so the bodybuilders had to back off a little bit, and the dosage of the arginine came down. And what happened is a number of really fine companies ultimately figured out that less arginine, a little bit of citrulline, citrulline converts to arginine through your body system, and that becomes more of a time release. And nitric oxide actually performs much more of a healing basis if it's systemically going on a longer period of time than just a short spike.
You said that also gives energy, like, it increases your energy or energy stores. So why is that?
It increases oxygenation of the blood. In fact, the best quality of your blood is blood that has nitric oxide in it. In fact, there have been, I've had very, very fine runners, athletes, that they've done the VO2 max, and they found that actually their oxygen increases by 20 to 25% after they've increased their nitric oxide. So the arginine gave people better oxygenation, better pump, blood flow. So it does increase the blood flow. And the other thing that nitric oxide does is it increases the lymphatic contraction. So when you increase the lymphatic contraction, you're actually getting the bad stuff out. So the blood flow and oxygen coming in with nitric oxide, and the lymphatic system functioning more efficiently on the other side of it.
Now, I know nitric oxide, there's a real growth trend for consuming it, but as a consumer, what should I be aware of? Like, if people are saying, "Oh, we have nitric oxide, and it's a part of our formulation," but are there representations made about it that we've got it and they can lay claim to it because of a labeling thing, but it really doesn't get used in the body?
Well, you might find it interesting that when at the time the Nobel Prize was coming out and validating the discovery of nitric oxide, which was about 10 or 12 years before that,
right,
the development of Viagra occurred. And so, interesting enough, Viagra essentially sucks all the nitric oxide from your body and helps it come into that special place.
Right.
So you're able to have that. So one of the mischaracterizations was, originally it was pumping for bodybuilders. The other was the solution for erectile dysfunction,
right,
which was important. But the other thing you've got to remember is that nitric oxide is the grandchild of nitroglycerin.
right.
And nitroglycerin was discovered by Alfred Nobel
Ah,
of the Nobel Prize.
Wow, full circle.
How interesting is that? And so when you take a nitroglycerin tablet,
right,
it essentially is saying nitric oxide to the rescue, and it sucks all the nitric oxide out of your system to help get rid of the angina pain. But then you're depleted.
right.
So the reality is that it does alleviate the pain, but there's now emerging studies that it actually could cause a cardiac event because you don't have enough nitric oxide. And interesting enough, Case Western University and also Dr. Stamler, one of the great nitric oxide experts, he determined that nitric oxide is necessary now in blood transfusions because that when you have transfused blood and it leaves your body, it depletes itself of its nitric oxide. And so that's why there's actually mortality from blood transfusions that are now being clinically proven, a small percentage, less than 10%, but that's because there's no nitric oxide in the blood. Well, here I am telling people how to safely increase their nitric oxide, and there are thousands of studies saying that every chronic illness is impacted by nitric oxide. Every chronic illness is impacted by a lack of vitamin D3. And yet nobody's talking about how to supplement or raise your nitric oxide safely. They talk about, well, maybe you could inhale nitric oxide gas and all of these complicated pharmaceutical-based type things that they're working on. And yet you have a simple amino acid, arginine, you have a purple vegetable, beet, and you have kale, and you have citrulline, which is extracted from watermelon, for heaven's sakes, in a lot of instances. And those ingredients, natural ingredients, will safely signal your body and say, produce nitric oxide. So essentially it stimulates the body. And here we have some of the most critical illnesses out there. And yet I'm fighting and looking to the day when every surgery, every blood transfusion, takes a nitric oxide boosting product or something to help alleviate all of these terrible complications that come when your body's depleted of nitric oxide.
Are there attempts to do synthetic applications of nitric oxide supplementation versus natural? Because you just named a bunch of plants and so on that say, okay, here's the varying elements where you can put a formula together. What about synthetic, and is there a difference?
They've been working on it, and essentially the major blush that everyone has is Viagra, but think of the side effects, and people know that there's side effects. So too much of nitric oxide at the with the wrong type of delivery can actually have some problems. It'll be effective, just like with just big handful of arginine capsules or powder from the local store. You can take all the arginine you want and get the benefits of nitric oxide, but it's really important that you buffer the excess nitric oxide with vitamin B12 and also with antioxidants to make sure that they're scavenged out and never get to the free radical range.
So I'm still not clear what I need to steer away from or be wary of.
Oh, well, one of the things, Patrick, that people should be wary of is that you ought to know a little bit about the quality of the arginine or the quality of the citrulline. Now, there's several types of arginine that actually function in different ways. It comes from different sources. There's a fermented source from plants. There's another one that comes from animal feathers or bird feathers. There's also one that is made essentially in the lab. And all of them are effective. Some are more effective at different phases, whether it spikes it faster, delays it, and then extends it longer. But the science of that is getting pretty important. But an average would be that you'd want to take between 2 and 5 grams of arginine. You'd want to have probably a gram of citrulline because that becomes a time release situation. And if possible, I'm a big fan of the beet solution, which the beet is a secondary pathway of nitric oxide through the mouth. And so what that does is that supplements the arginine that impacts nitric oxide through the gut. So I'm very happy about the great PR that the beet people have done.
I've been seeing a lot of PR around
it's
beets.
been great because, and that was actually one of the reasons why I moved away from my first enterprise was I felt it was important to have beets. And I'm very excited to have organic beet juice powder as a part of it because some people have arginine resistance. Some people have, it exasperates if it's not buffered properly, could exasperate herpes. And so it's important that you have kind of a well thought through blended, top notch type of supplemental product. But the beets are a part of it because 2 pathways is better than 1.
So obviously this comes in through diet. I mean, I could eat beets. I can eat varying foods that have arginine in it. So is it important to get higher concentrations through supplementation as compared to just eating a diet that would provide?
It goes back, Patrick, and you're probably well aware of we all believe and are excited about organic fruits and vegetables, and the same thing with other fruit. But as when you do the research and find out how depleted our soils are in the country and how different people have seen how much metal and how much toxic waste in certain areas that some of these can be, even in other countries, that we're really not sure where these things are growing. One of the challenges is you'd have to eat a lot of beets by themselves. And even though I like beets on a salad or even drinking some beet juice, supplementing makes it so much easier. And the requirements in a quality manufacturer is tested it for the beet, the pesticides, the herbicides, the metal content, those types of things. So the multiple things that a quality supplement provides eliminates not knowing where the beets or the vegetables like kale were grown.
So minimally, I want to look for an organic supplement as a consumer in this realm.
I think you'd want to have organic ingredients whenever you can. But interesting enough, in the vitamin D situation, which I happen to think that vitamin D and nitric oxide to do, that's my passion, is the delivery of nitric oxide and vitamin D3. I think there's nothing better. But the D2, even though it's organic, coming from mushrooms, has been proven to be about half as effective in building the blood serum level of the D in your blood versus the traditional D3 type of delivery. So as a choice, I ultimately settled on the D3 as being a superior delivery for the D benefits than even the organic mushroom situation.
So there's a synergy between D3 and nitric oxide?
Unbelievable.
Talk about that.
In fact, Tadeusz Smolinski, one of the most brilliant men I've ever met, the University of Ohio biochemist, he's written over 400 articles on published articles on nitric oxide and vitamin D3 and everything else. He published 2 years ago the fact that D3 had a dramatic impact on cardiovascular health. Well, nitric oxide was given the Nobel Prize because of its impact on cardiovascular health. So together, what nitric oxide does is it thins the arterial wall so that the supplement, the other ingredients are more receptive. So we've seen people's D level improve significantly when combined with nitric oxide, as opposed to taking 10, 15,000 IUs a day in a capsule or in a drop. Much better results in raising the blood serum has been our experience. Now we're going to actually prove that in Professor Molinski's lab. That's my next experiment. But we've seen a lot of people move the needle on their vitamin D combined with the quality nitric oxide delivery by almost double within a year, which is pretty amazing. So they do play an important role. The D is a neurohormone. Nitric oxide is a naturally occurring in the body. But in my opinion, they are the foundational two most important things that a person should supplement.
Are there any claims relative to this that the FDA has approved, or is it just the
it's hard to
support these things? I know. That's why I'm asking, because I know there's a lot of data and research. So
what happens often with our friends and at the FDA is that they basically say you can't make the nitric oxide claims that have over 150,000 articles, published studies.
Well, that's why I was wondering,
with your product.
There's so much data.
So the reality is, what you have to do is you have to say that we believe, here is the nitric oxide research, which is bulletproof. But here is our product, and for these reasons, we believe it stimulates and sustains nitric oxide. Now, what I did is I went to the top expert in the world, Professor Molinski, and I said, what do I have to do to test this product to see if it delivers nitric oxide? And I'm happy to tell you, this will be the first public announcement. Our clinical paper on the cellular delivery of that formula is going to be published next month, worldwide, on delivering nitric oxide in less than 1 second after being exposed to the formula. So we're pretty excited about it.
So the study's done. It's just
study's done. We've been waiting for publication. Publication's supposed to come out at the first of the year. So we're pretty excited about that.
Any other synergies? So we got D3, we got nitric oxide. Any other things that synergize to create a great effect?
Excellent question. Hawthorn. Hawthorn berry is a critical ingredient to sustain nitric oxide. There's a branded ingredient called estrogen. And estrogen is fractionated Panax ginseng and astragalus root. That's been clinically proven to extend nitric oxide by 50, 60%. So I felt both of those were really, really important. Most people need selenium. And being the fact that I was trying to pursue the highest quality supplement quality, but the delivery with the nitric oxide, we put in over 40 ingredients. So grapeseed extract, the selenium, as I said, we've even gone and have a full nano, micro B series of all the B vitamins, because vitamin B12 is really, really important, not only to the body, but it also helps buffer excess nitric oxide. So B12 is important. Of course, vitamin C's always important, and a little bit of E and all of the good antioxidants we think that those are important because nitric oxide opens up the cell to deliver the good stuff.
So the basic theme, in other words, from the lens that you look through when it comes to human supplementation, is that you're putting nitric oxide sort of as the hub here, and then you're putting all these other spokes around it because they have interplay there to create...
Helps deliver their efficacy.
Yeah.
I really believe that. And so I would tell people that if you... there's a million wonderful supplements out there. And if you check your quality, again, often you get what you pay for, but you need to scrutinize. And we have some pretty good label readers. And unfortunately, there's been a lot of, there are people who don't live up to the label, which is unfortunate. But finding something that does, I believe that nitric oxide and vitamin D3 are the cornerstone, along with vitamin C, are the cornerstone. And in many cases, it can replace 2/3, 3/4 of all the other things that most people are taking, because you can deliver the magnesium, you can deliver the B vitamins, you can deliver the selenium and those types of things, all if a formula has those types of things in it.
And yeah, this kind of begs a general philosophical question when it comes to supplementation, because you have, almost as you just described, take magnesium, here, take vitamin C, take vitamin D, take D3. You can have individual vitamins of very high quality, right, and take them. But in general, is it better to find, in your opinion, a synergized formula that has all these components kind of together as compared to trying to do a bunch of isolated vitamins?
My experience has been in talking to some people who are a lot smarter in the supplement world than me, is that most synthetic vitamins are not absorbable. And that's because the body has mechanisms to prevent them. And primarily that's the endothelial wall that lines the artery. So I believe what you need to do is make the endothelium your friend. Yeah. And the best way to make it your friend is to stimulate it to make nitric oxide. It keeps it smooth so it doesn't end up accumulating plaque or waste. The nitric oxide helps the lymphatic system get rid of the trash instead of accumulating, both in your body, brain, colon, and other places. But I think that synergistic aspect of opening up your body, because most people after they're in their 30s, their nitric oxide starts sloughing off to when you're my age, you're maybe producing 5% of what you were producing as a 25-year-old.
Wow, is that known, like 5%?
5% when you're in your 60s.
Is there a reason for that?
It's called the aging process.
Well, but it seems like somehow it's baked into our design. If we're falling off by that much, I mean, it's 5% is not a gradual decline.
Right.
That's
well, that would be starting at losing 10% at 30, and then more as the years go on, to eventually that's what your natural, unless you're eating a very, very vegan, high diet in kale, spinach, and the nitric oxide types of foods, or a lot of meat, red meat, ironically, which has amino acids in it, like arginine. So the body, for whatever reason, starts aging and it stops its normal creation and signaling of nitric oxide. Now, it stimulates with exercise,
right,
and it stimulates with diet, and it's better when you're in a non-polluted environment, and it's better, and guess what else when you lose your nitric oxide? Stress. So think of stressful life, think of stressful politics, stressful finances, all these things that impact us. It all sucks the nitric oxide right out of us.
So it's kind of the chronic, maybe the chronicity of life, that's causing us to absorb less and less.
Exactly. And the same thing even with vitamin D3. One of the things that happens is Patrick, it's amazing. You can Google up almost any chronic illness, and you will find studies that say not enough nitric oxide and not enough vitamin D3, without exception. I mean, I've been in a bar having a sandwich, and I'll be talking to the person next to me, and they'll say, well, and we'll start talking. Of course, I talk about nitric oxide. And they would say, well, will it help celiacs I said, or will it help sickle cell anemia or whatever? And I go, I don't know. Let's Google it up. So we Google it up without exception. There's always a study that says depletion of nitric oxide and not enough vitamin D3. And yet, think about it. It's only been the last 10 years that our world and the community has realized the vitamin D3 was important. And that was because of Dr. Mercola going on Dr. Oz talking about it. And all of a sudden the world in 10 years is now on board with vitamin D3. They still aren't totally on board with nitric oxide, other than they're seeing advertisements on the beets and they're seeing it for erectile dysfunction, but they're not seeing it as the critical body regulator of oxygen and carbon dioxide in the body. In fact, the study at Case Western said nitric oxide is the essential third gas to regulate carbon dioxide and oxygen in the body. Now, how would that impact cancer? Carbon dioxide, mutation of cells, not enough nitric oxide, cancer. So nitric oxide is really at the basis of every bodily function as the body's traffic cop and signaling to help maintain all of these critical bodily functions that go on.
Is there a relationship between nitric oxide and NAD?
Yes, because they're amino acids. And so yes, they have an impact with each other. And so there are lots of things that nitric oxide helps deliver, and it's mainly known as the body's regulator. And so that's why when you stimulate it, not only does it heal, it heals the artery. Well, if we look at what happens when you have chronically degenerative arteries, neuropathy, osteoporosis, periodontal disease, Alzheimer's, chronic illness. I mean, we've had people that by elevating their nitric oxide, their symptoms from many, many horrible diseases are finally manageable.
You alluded earlier to how sometimes people are almost doing the sledgehammer approach, just sucking all the nitric oxide out of the system. You have like Viagra and other such things. And then suddenly there's a depletion, then there's a replenishment. Is there, I guess, a healthier or sane way just to have more of a constant stream of nitric oxide as compared to the deplete, replenish type of cycle?
Well, I think one of the things that's interesting, and I really credit the beet people for raising the awareness, but beets through the nitrite pathway essentially stimulates nitric oxide for a couple of hours. That's why even though they talk a lot about we think we're as good or better than arginine, because some people have arginine resistance. It's kind of a genetic thing. But the challenge is most of them have now put citrulline in, which becomes arginine. So it's interesting that they say it's all about the beets, but it's also still about the arginine, which is now the citrulline becoming arginine. Arginine stimulates nitric oxide and lasts a couple of hours as well. So that's why having things like more citrulline that time releases into more arginine, more stimulation, hawthorn, estrogen, some of these extenders can give you therapeutic nitric oxide for 12 to 24 hours a day. Well, imagine the healing during the night cycle. So we recommend actually supplementing morning and night.
Oh, twice a day.
Twice a day, because you want to have that boost of energy, clarity, oxygen, without having the caffeine dependency or crash. And then at night, either before the evening meal, because some people say, well, is it going to keep me awake if I stimulate my nitric? Most people, it helps them sleep deeper and better. But when you take it at night, it actually does its reparative work through all of the body's capillaries.
And that would make sense because you're healing when you're sleeping. Yeah.
Oh, and one other thing that we found is really exciting is anti-inflammatories. The inflammation has become now the basis of all chronic illness.
Yes.
So we believe that supplementing your nitric oxide with turmeric, astaxanthin, and other anti-inflammatories will really go a long ways in preventing the degenerative process, the aging process, and also chronic illness. So we decided to triple our turmeric just because turmeric is phenomenal. It's one of the great new buzzwords and exciting things. And so if you have a quality turmeric or astaxanthin. Those things are fantastic for fighting inflammation.
Well, John, it seems like you could talk for days about this and, and never get bored.
It is so exciting to see people have their lives changed by increasing their nitric oxide and their vitamin D. It's the most rewarding thing I've ever done.
Well, I think the best testimonial is just looking at your energy. I mean,
Well, I was dead 12 years ago. I should have died 12 years ago.
And it's the moment I walked in the door, and I said, "You have abundant energy through through this." So, and to hear you say, I should have been dead 12 years ago. So, where's your purpose in all this? So, obviously, this is very personal for you in some ways. I know I can see you're delighted by the results that you see in people, et cetera, and you advocate so well for nitric oxide and why people need to incorporate it into their life. Do you have a clear purpose around all this for you?
My purpose is I want to eliminate people to have to eliminate as many interventive surgeries as possible, to have fewer complications from those surgeries, from infection, MRSA virus, all those types of things. I mean, people go in and get their knee replaced, and 1 in 5 or 1 in 4 end up with all kinds of infection. Guess what the body's greatest natural anti-infection thing is? Nitric oxide and vitamin D3. So my purpose is I want to help educate the world that there are answers that can be done through natural, high-quality supplementation that can give you a more energetic life, a better love life, a better public service life, a better career, and to not have to be dependent upon the 12 prescriptions that somebody my age should be on. And I haven't been on a prescription in 12 years for heart problems, blood pressure problems. Now, I'm obviously not, a marathon runner, as you can tell. But the reality is, I think that's part of the great commercial, the fact that I'm actually don't take the time to do everything I should do, but by supplementing adequately, it's given me my life back.
So you take no prescriptions?
No.
And how old are you?
68.
No prescriptions, 68.
No prescriptions, and I had clogged arteries, coronary arteries. I had chest pains. I had shortness of breath. I had all of that stuff. I can get on a bicycle, even being too short for my weight. I can get on a bicycle and go ride, taking a couple of doses of nitric oxide, and the next day not feel like I've been run over. I mean, because the lymphatic system works better.
And you're definitely not dragging yourself around. I mean,
Well, again, it comes back, and thank you for your passion of what you're doing in educating the world. That's my passion, is to educate people that there's hope. That there's hope. I was with an 83-year-old yesterday. Her renal failure was on the verge of dialysis. 2 years later, her nephrologist says, why is your kidney normal? And she smiles and looks at me and she goes, I know, and you know. And I said, I guess I should go talk to him.
Yeah.
So that's pretty exciting when somebody's looking at being tethered to dialysis, kidney failure, and death, and they've perhaps gotten their life back.
Well, thank you for your enthusiasm and for your purpose and for taking the time to sit and share all this with us. I can tell you that, I find it not just fascinating, but stimulating, and exciting that there's these types of solutions in the world. So thank you for sharing all of that.
Absolutely my pleasure.
For me, when I was doing that interview, it passed by, it seemed like in minutes. I hope you were engaged and saw the thrill ride that it was, and it inspired you too. This concludes episode 2. I have to tell you that many of these interviews I watch over and over again. Why? Because every time I see them, I pick up something new. It solidifies my understanding. One thing I know is that when you support us by owning Supplements Revealed, you're also supporting your own health. It's a win-win. It's something that can make a big difference in your life, supports the vision we have to get people to understand natural health and supplementation on a higher level so that they can live better lives too. Really great to be with you here for episode 2, but we are really just getting started. Episode 3 is coming up next, and it's definitely something you don't want to miss.
We're all about one thing. We are about nutrient sufficiency. We are about putting the nutrients back into your body that people have no idea that they're even missing. We just walk around more and more and more nutrient deficient. Supplements, if they can get that level up, fantastic, do it.
The consumer's smart enough to know, I like this product, it really works for me, so I'm going to trust this company and use their other products. If this company has one product and they're just pushing it out on the market because of Dr. Oz, or they're making ridiculous claims, or they have proprietary blends, then I would run.
There's like some outlandish, outrageous claims out there across the board with the supplement industry, and it's frustrating to me. And you get customers saying, why is this better than that? You start to look at these things and these people are way over promising.